You're watching The Verdict on News 15, brought to you by Laborde Earls Injury Lawyers.
On today's edition of The Verdict, we take a look at the 1983 kidnapping, ransom, and murder of Aubrey LaHaye, a retired banker who was abducted from his own home in Mamou, Louisiana.
So Aubrey LaHaye, one morning, on a cold January morning, heard a knock at the door just before sunrise. And when he got up to answer the door, he was greeted by a young man wearing a beret and forced inside the house with a knife at knife point. And supposedly the ploy was that the guy had broken down and he needed a tow truck. Well, as it turns out, that wasn't the case at all. The guy was there to do absolutely no good. Went into the house, brought Mr. LaHaye into the house at knife point, then tied his wife to the bed so that she couldn't escape or couldn't help in any way, and eventually took him out of the house and again at knife point. Later that day, when she was able to escape, she called about 2 hours later and was able to summon some help. In fact, at first, she had tried to help the guy by looking through the phone book, see if she could find a tow service for the guy that had knocked at the door, and that's when all of this started to unfold. But when Mr. LaHaye went out of the door with this assailant, that was the last time that he was ever seen alive. Mr. LaHaye was the president of Guaranty Bank there in the community of Vidrine, Riddell, in the Mamou area, the parish of Evangeline, and was well known throughout the parish. He and his family, his wife, 2 sons and a daughter, of course, were very concerned about his welfare, especially when they got a phone call from this would-be kidnapper, if you would, that said they wanted money. They wanted $500,000. And the family was clever by saying, listen, we're not giving you anything until we see that there's some proof of life. You know, what if we give you the money and we get a corpse back? I mean, that would be kind of anti-productive. So the search was widespread in Evangeline Parish. The sheriff, Sheriff Vidrine, Ransom Vidrine, had his own ideas about who might have been responsible for this. In fact, his leading suspect, in his mind, he sort of built a mental case there, was a guy that had been in jail in Evangeline Parish and was there because of previous burglaries and activities such as that. So that became the sheriff's primary suspect, especially since the guy had escaped from prison about 2 years before and had not been seen since. The search went on for about 10 days in Evangeline Parish. Finally, a hunter who, and of course everybody in Evangeline Parish is a hunter basically, a guy went into the woods later that January, about January 16th, and discovered Mr. LaHaye's body, still in the pajamas and slippers that he had been abducted in. Unfortunately, as you might imagine, he was no longer alive. In fact, his hands were tied and he was very casually left in the woods.
That concludes today's edition of The Verdict. Tune in next time for the trial and verdict of Aubrey's abductor, John Brady Bafta.
This presentation of The Verdict on News 15 was brought to you by Laborde Earls Injury Lawyers.